Good evening. You're watching the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. First, the headlines. Yemen's government delegation quits talks in Kuwait with Houthi rebels, despite resuming them earlier this month. A Syrian hospital in Idlib province is damaged after a direct hit, as the US says it is skeptical of a Russian announcement that it opened humanitarian corridors in Aleppo. And the National Museum opens for the public and attracts many visitors in the first day. Those were the headlines. Now for the news in detail. Yemen's government delegation has quit talks in Kuwait with Houthi rebels, despite resuming them earlier this month. Officials with Yemen's internationally recognized government of President Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi said they were considering proposals to reconvene the talks, which have failed to bridge the gap with the rebels in Oman. Hadi's negotiators are demanding the implementation of a UN Security Council resolution which stipulates the withdrawal of militias from all cities. The Houthis want the Arab-led offensives to stop first and also share power in transitional government. Meanwhile, a UN spokesman in Kuwait, however, said Ismail Wald Sheikh Ahmed was scheduled to meet with rebels and with ambassadors of the 18 countries backing the peace process in Yemen. Indirect negotiations held in Kuwait since April have failed to make headway. Most of the discussions focused on the type of the government to run Yemen during a transition period. A Syrian maternity hospital in a rebel-held area of Idlib province was extensively damaged after a direct hit. Internationally, charity Save the Children, which supports the hospital, said. The hospital is the only maternity facility for about 70 miles around. It works with around 1,300 women and children, and a month delivered about 340 babies last month. Meanwhile, the United States said it is skeptical of a Russian announcement that it had opened humanitarian corridors in Aleppo, with Secretary of State John Kerry featuring potential Rus. Russia, a key ally of Syria, announced several corridors for civilians and surrendering fighters to leave the northern Syrian city, which has been under heavy assault for weeks. Kerry, who has spoken twice with Moscow in the past day and met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday in Laos, said cooperation between Moscow and Washington could turn sour if the announcement proves deceitful. The United States urged the UN Security Council to back a regional force for South Sudan to shore up UN peacekeepers unable to cope with the violence. The Council adopted a resolution extending the mandate of the UN mission in South Sudan until August the 12th to allow time to negotiate another measure authorizing the new force. The proposed resolution is also expected to slap an arms embargo on South Sudan and targeted sanctions on those seen as responsible for the violence. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power said the proposal by the African Regional IGAD bloc to send an intervention brigade to Juba should be supported by the Council. Juba was rocked by several days of heavy fighting in early July between government forces and those loyal to rebel chief Riek Machar, the latest upsurge in the 2.5-year war. Nearly 300 people died in the violence and 2 Chinese peacekeepers were killed in an attack on a UN base where thousands of civilians rushed for safety. African leaders are expected to meet with South Sudan's President Salva Kiir in the coming days to discuss the regional force. Speaking at an event in the Turkish capital Ankara commemorating those killed and wounded during a failed July the 15th military coup, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he was dropping all lawsuits against those charged with insulting him. Erdogan insisted a broad crackdown on the Fethullah Gulen movement, whom it accuses of orchestrating the coup attempt, was necessary and would continue. He also criticized Turkey's European and Western allies for their stance on the government's crackdown, which has included a purge of the civilian service, military, judiciary and educational sectors, and the closure of hundreds of schools and dozens of media outlets.
Açık konuşuyorum. Darbecilerin
8 Turkish soldiers were killed in clashes with Kurdish militants in the country's restive southeast, raising the toll from the deadliest such attack on the military since the failed coup. The soldiers were performing a security check when they were attacked by militants from the Kurdistan's Workers' Party, or PKK, in Hakkari province. The army said in a statement another 25 soldiers were injured during the clashes in the area close to northern Iraq. Hundreds of Turkish security forces members have been killed by the PKK in the attack since the collapse of a 2-year ceasefire in July last year. In response, the government has launched military operations against the Kurdish militant group. An important district in Afghanistan's southern province of Helmand has fallen under Taliban control after heavy fighting that killed around 17 police and wounded up to 10 others. The director of Helmand's provincial council said that Taliban militants attacked a series of police checkpoints on Friday night as part of a larger assault in the Kanashin district. The central authorities have been trying for many months to convince rural districts to reduce or remove police checkpoints, as they are manned in small numbers by police who are vulnerable to Taliban attack. The fall of Kanashin follows a report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, concluding that government forces have lost 5% of the territory they held at the end of January. Still to come in our news bulletin, 90% of Sao Tome and Principe's budget comes from foreign aid, but it's hoped a tourism boom could reduce its independence.
هنا الرائحة العالقة بالذاكرة تأخذنا دهشة مختلفة لتبهرنا بجمالها الآسر حيث ملتقى الأسرة. امنح نفسك شغف التجربة، فهنا حكاية الجمال لا تنتهي. مهرجان صلالة السياحي 2016 من 15 من يوليو إلى 31 من أغسطس. عمان، المحبة والوئام.
Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. The number of visitors to the National Museum reached more than 500. The museum, in its first day of opening, attracted tourists of various nationalities to acquaint them with the museum's displays. Some of the artifacts date back to more than 1 million years ago. The museum will be open for visitors for 4 days a week, from Saturday to Tuesday until 30th of September 2016, opening hours 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The museum aims to highlight the civilizational, historical and cultural dimensions of the Sultanate. It focuses its efforts on preserving and restoring the program to rehabilitate artifacts that were selected according to the museum's narration starting from 2010. The levels of Muscat Securities Markets indices increased during last week, achieving gains of around 36.2 million Omani Riyal. The weekly bulletin issued by MSM pointed out the rise in the share prices of 27 companies as the shares of 14 companies declined. Ali's Bank topped the best increases as its rate reached 10.7%. Various activities were organized by Oman Association for Elderly Friends in the Governorate of Dhofar, bringing together the elderly people and the new generation. The events included awareness lectures, sports and entertainment activities. Part of the event was a training workshop on voluntary works and its role in the society, as well as a friendly football match between veteran players and young players. The twin archipelago of São Tomé and Príncipe in the Atlantic coast of Africa was once the world's leading producer of cocoa. Today, the island nation is promoting itself as a tourist destination, and its number of visitors is slowly rising. More details in the following report.
With a lush interior dotted with cocoa and coffee plantations and a coast lined with empty palm-fringed beaches, the tiny twin archipelago of São Tomé and Príncipe ticks many boxes of a tropical paradise. Only now is Africa's second smallest nation and one of its poorest waking up to tourism.
There aren't many tourists, which works in São Tomé's favour. People here are very nice despite the poverty we see. It's a very safe country.
As well as sun, sea and relaxation, tourists can explore the history of the island nation, once the world's leading cocoa producer, at former plantations like this one. João Carlo da Silva has transformed his family's ancestral home into a restaurant, guest house and artist's retreat.
We must create an intelligent, creative tourism for people who like seeing people, the population, and to get to know the history of places. But at the same time, no to mass tourism.
Despite its attractions, the tourism industry is struggling to take off. Tour operators complain of too few flights, a high cost of borrowing and a lack of trained staff.
We have real difficulty finding good people in the tourism industry. Someone to work in the reception, to work in the restaurant serving tables, jobs like that. It's a bit complicated.
But the island way of life is slowly catching on. In 2014, 18,000 people visited, up from just 8,000 in 2010. Today, 90% of the archipelago's budget comes from foreign aid, and it's hoped a tourism boom could reduce its dependence while lifting many of its citizens from poverty.
Now for the general weather forecast around the Sultanate. Cloudy skies will prevail over the coastal areas of the Governorate of Dhofar and its nearby mountains, with chances of intermittent drizzle. The rest of the Sultanate will have clear skies with cloud accumulation and scattered rain over the Hajar Mountains. Winds will be easterly to northeasterly light to moderate over the coasts of Sea of Oman, while on the coastal areas of the Arabian Sea it will be southwesterly moderate to active. Seas will be rough along the coasts of the Arabian Sea with a maximum wave height of 3.5 meters and slight along the rest of the coasts with a maximum wave height of 1 meter. Sultanate of Oman television. Before we end tonight's bulletin, here are the main points once again. Yemen's government delegation quit talks in Kuwait with Houthi rebels despite resuming them earlier this month. A Syrian hospital in Idlib province is damaged after a direct hit, as the US says it is skeptical of a Russian announcement that it opened humanitarian corridors in Aleppo. And the National Museum opens for the public and attracts many visitors in the first day. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news bulletin. From all of us here in the newsroom and the studios, good night.